Dear friends, I welcome everyone who is currently watching my channel and Vitaly Portnikov's channel live. We try not to break the established tradition, every 2 weeks on Fridays in the evening, talk to each other on various interesting topics. Exchange opinions, and I hope that it will be interesting to you as always. I can already see by the number of people who have appeared in our chat, they are ready to ask questions, comment on what is happening. And of course, I ask you to react first of all with likes. Vitaly Eduardovich and I are like inveterate experienced YouTubers. We really love it when we get likes right on the air. They are worth their weight in gold, expensive and expensive. Vitaly Eduardovich, well, which day is already the main topic. Probably this is a discussion of Trump's tweet. Well, not a tweet of course, his entries in his own, as he is called, coward social, his own social network. Yes, but it seems to me that this is an official statement because it is even signed by Trump there. It's not just a tweet there, it's quite an official document. Moreover, what happened? Why did Trump suddenly turn around so unexpectedly, began to say completely unexpected things about Ukraine? And Russia called a paper tiger for the first time, and he promised that it would not happen again, by the way already. Have you already promised? It's already giving up, for God's sake. Yes, at a meeting with Erdogan, he said that he would no longer call Russia a paper tiger. Once was enough for her. Well, next time he might call her a paper bear, yes, because someone does. I wanted sands, yes. But there are no paper bears, are there? There are no paper bears either. What bears will be made of, or you can make bears out of shit and sticks. There are such things. I won't even mind. But I will tell you that it just seems to me that a certain time has passed since Alaska, if we are serious. Here, many in Kiev said that it was Zelensky who persuaded Trump, and before that they said that in fact, Trump talked a lot with his employees in the administration, which adheres to the same views that Russia does not want peace. But the question arises, why did Trump not listen to Zelensky or to these employees earlier? Or they obviously told him exactly the same things. Nothing factually new has actually happened. It cannot be said that the Ukrainian army is advancing on some Russian positions, liberating cities, expelling Russians from the occupied territory. No. It cannot be said that the Russian offensive on Ukrainian positions has stopped. No. It cannot be said that the Russian air terror has stopped against Ukrainian cities. Probably, Russia now does not have so many, let's say, missiles that it can use in a combined attack, so it is now saving up, I would say, weapons for a new massive strike on Ukraine. But I proceed from such a simple thing. The Alaska summit ended in a complete fiasco for Trump. We've all seen it. He spoke to the press for 3 minutes after the summit ended. He was clearly annoyed. He said there was no deal. And it is obvious that this is not what he expected when he met with Putin. I do not know who messed up his brains there, Putin or Witkov, or he himself, but nevertheless it was a defeat. It's not in Trump's rules to admit defeat. A few minutes later, he changed his shoes in the air in the literal sense of the word. Because here he was already on board his presidential liner on the way from Anchorage. Washington was saying completely different things about this meeting that were not true. In general, they are completely unrelated to the real state of affairs. That this is a successful meeting, that this is a successful negotiation process. He invited Zelensky to the White House, invited European leaders who expressed a desire to come with Zelensky. He said that he would initiate a trilateral meeting of Trump, Zelensky and Putin, if you notice. Now no one is talking about it at all, said that Putin, after a telephone conversation with him, is ready for a bilateral meeting with Zelensky. No one is talking about it now. That is, it was released such, I would say a hall without firecrackers like this. So that no one sees reality and understands that the President of the United States, or maybe it was Putin's last message. Come back, I'll forgive everything. I don't think so. I think it was just a disguise, Just a disguise. Well, look, after all, firm which side to look. They didn't agree on anything. Putin was no longer escorted off the red carpet, sent home, put on a plane without any honors. And on the other hand, for him, for Putin, this summit ended in failure. He failed to convince Trump of anything and failed to persuade him of anything. Or maybe he didn't have to convince Trump of anything. Maybe he just had to go to Anchorage before going to Beijing to show what a serious leader he is, that he meets with Trump Xi Jinping. That he is a world player, he did it all in China. But that's not the point. I'm not thinking about Putin right now, I'm thinking about Trump. We're still discussing this Trump tweet with you. How long has it been since Anchorage? Has it been more than a month or less? It's just the way things are going right now. Events are so tightly following one another that it seems that Anchorage was already a long time ago, but it was in August nevertheless. Well, yes, it's the end of September. I'll check it out now. Well, I think that more than a month has already passed. Anchorage, meeting in Anchorage. The meeting of Trump and Putin in Anchorage on August 15th. Well, that means more than a month, right? More than a month. More than a month, yes. So what does this mean in practice? That Anchorage has already begun to be forgotten, and Trump, in principle, began to say what he could have said. Immediately after this meeting. He could have said it right away and let it out. So I offered Putin to cease fire. He refuses. For 3.5 years, Russia has been storming Ukraine, but it has not achieved any success, and this harms its international image, its economy. And Ukraine, meanwhile, has the opportunity to liberate its own territories, at least until the start of this war. Could he have said that the day after Anchorage? Could. This assessment would be no different from what he just said on the 24th of August. September 24th. But then he would have to admit that he met with Putin in vain. He just endured enough time for Anchorage to become history, and now he has come up with a new rhetorical device. Perhaps hoping that this new rhetorical device, as they say in the White House, will force Putin to go to more realistic negotiations on the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Although, to be honest, I don't really believe it. And it's not because someone convinced him of something. He saw it all for himself in Anchorage. I think they both saw it. He saw everything himself in Beijing, maybe he did. Good sound. Putin is a cheater, so Xi cheated on me. No, or he realized that all his efforts to tear Russia away from China had gone to waste. That Putin just stupidly used the meeting with him, in order to be more confident in negotiations with Xi Jinping. Yes, and so it can be. But this is a combination of circumstances, I would say. I think they made the following conclusions in Van College. Trump concluded that Putin does not want any peace, and it is necessary to talk more harshly with him, or at least demonstrate determination to help Ukraine so that Putin goes to some real negotiations. And Putin, apparently, concluded that Trump was completely useless, and that Trump would not go for a decisive confrontation with him. Because if you notice after Anchorage, and especially after Beijing, such a spiral of escalation began, which we have not seen in these 3.5 years, and progressive. This is a real escalation ladder. We climb it like a mountain. The shelling of Ukraine is massive. Drones in Poland. Fighter jets in Estonia, drones in Denmark. I have listed only a part of the events to you. There was a lot more actually. Yesterday there were drones in the airspace near the United States, when Russian planes even flew strollers. In other words, we can say that he has lost his temper, using such, so to speak, Soviet propaganda slang. I think I've lost my belt. I've lost my belt, yes, of course. But it seems to me that there is still something deeply personal here. Still, it seems to me that Vitaly, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but he was breathing unevenly. That was something irrational about Trump's attitude to Putin. He liked him. Yes, he loved him, realizing that in principle it is not politically correct to love such a person. But he could not do anything with himself. And suddenly he let him down like that. That's the word summed up, because Trump's mouth has sounded many times already. Here. Yes, it's true, but I do not know if love has passed from this, to be honest. Well, he let me down, but it's a shame, well, such a person, well. You know, it's one step from love to hate. Well, again, we don't see any particular hatred yet. And Vladimirovich and I do not see Trump taking any concrete actions after this impressive tweet at all. I'm not saying that he constantly wants to convince Putin of what Putin cannot be convinced of, that this war is harming Russia itself. He talks about it all the time. The war is hurting Russia. It is destroying the Russian economy, and a huge number of people are being lost. Why would you like that? And Putin does not react to this. He does not believe that something is being destroyed. And something is not dying in greater numbers than planned. He's doing fine. So he doesn't really understand Trump's logic. Yes, in my opinion, he just doesn't care about people who die at the front. Of course, as with all other people. He doesn't care about anything at all. Maybe he doesn't give a damn about the economy because the economy is the foundation of his stability. But judging by his speech today to the governors elected on the day, a single day of voting not so long ago. In general, he is quite confident in economic stability. He feels himself the master of the situation. You've seen how he behaves. Well, if he allows himself to nightmare Europe in this situation, then everything is fine with him. Well, that's exactly what he thinks anyway. That's exactly what he thinks, that's what I'm talking about. I am not discussing the current state of the Russian economy right now. Unfortunately, we do not fully know anything about this, nor do we know the limits of the strength of this economy. It's true. But what? You know that many economists are independent economists. Most independent economists have been living in exile for a long time now. They are still trying to judge something according to Roskomstat data, and Rostat do not know exactly what it is called now. More and more data is being kept secret, and B, as some observers suspect, simply, as they say, publish figures and facts that do not correspond to reality. Well, it's like in a Soviet joke that there is a lie, a big lie statistics of the Central Statistical Office of the USSR. Do you remember how in Soviet times the yearbook of the CSU was published every year? Well, yes, this yearbook of this Central Statistical Office, sir, had nothing to do with the real statistics of the Soviet economy. That's the thing. Well, the old people who worked in Gosplan, you know, you probably knew the late Yevgeny Yasin. Yes, that's who. Yes, of course. I had this Soviet experience. They could judge the state of the economy there, I do not know, by the number of cranes that loom on the horizon of working cranes, or, for example, by the number and volume of rail traffic. Or, say, by the number of ads for office real estate or warehouse real estate. You understand, right? When the economy is booming, warehouses are required, space is required, offices are required, and lifting screens work, yes. But there is little transportation by rail. By the way, now, in my opinion, there is this indirect evidence that the volume of traffic on Russian railways is steadily falling. And that's probably saying something. Yes, I also think that indirect evidence is important. I agree. By the way, I was acquainted with Kirill Mazurov, who was the first deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, and headed the Soviet government during Alexei Kosygин's illness on several occasions. And I asked him how the idea of the economy was formed. And he told me, here he used the phrase, you know, this former member of the Politburo, that the understanding of economics was formed from the generality of information from various economic and non-economic departments. In other words, I realized that they were generally interested in the opinion of the KGB, simply put. In any case, I am sure that there were some research units inside the KGB that were engaged in analyzing the economic realities in the Soviet Union. Well, the thing is, yes. The thing is, I think that. Well, I personally did not know Andropov, but according to the stories of people who worked with Andropov, he was extremely pedantic, thorough, efficient, and read all sorts of references that were prepared for him and serious literature. But I must tell you that I think that even now Putin is guided by the idea of the economy. Not only listening to his economic ministers, but also receiving reports from the FS, from Patrushev, from Portnikov. Relatively speaking, from these people. And that's what they report to him there. This is also a very good question. The quality of the analysis ensures. Yes, that's exactly what it's about. Well, I think that if Putin did not feel so self-confident, he would not have arranged this escalation in Europe. Because it is really very serious. Oh yeah? Every day there are such chilling messages, then fighters were raised there, then submarines sailed somewhere. You see, once upon a time, when this big war was just beginning in 2022. And we saw these points on geographical maps of Ukrainian cities, villages, where missiles hit, where some warehouses explode there, where residential quarters fall there. And this, of course, was such, I think, for Europe, and even more so for Ukraine itself, absolutely again. That here we are talking about Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Ivano-Frankivsk, Sry, Poltava. As not as about the cities where you will visit there, relatively speaking, some kind of theatrical premiere, or a castle there. And how about the places where a missile strike hits? And now the same state is happening with European cities. I remember how I couldn't believe my eyes when I followed the monitoring channels that report where drones are flying in Ukraine. And it was on the night when there was this attack on Poland. And I suddenly began to see the names of Polish cities that I visited there many times, almost all, wherever these drones flew. And I realized with amazement that I was now following the Polish cities on the map where the drones were flying. And today, for example, I opened the Danish newspaper Berlingske, which is now there, like other Danish publications, is broadcasting live events related to drones in Denmark, and read that drones were discovered over the Swedish city of Karlskrona, which he also once visited near Denmark, there in my opinion, near the laboratory of the famous, so to speak, astronomer Tycho Brahe in this area. Well, such a historical place. That's why I remember, because there is this island where Tycho Brahe lived, and where he made his laboratory. And where there were major astronomical discoveries completely. I'm not thinking about astronomical discoveries, but about a drone over a castrum, you know. All these cities are well known to me Danish, Copenhagen, Aalborg are there, somewhere I lived there in Aalborg. I have visited Copenhagen several times, I have not been to Karkara. And now these are not tourist memories for me, but reflections on where the airspace is blocked, where the next drone appeared. This, of course, is amazing. And I think that if I think about it this way from Kiev, then I imagine what a person who is in Copenhagen thinks. That there are some incomprehensible drones over the international airfield in his hometown, which can explode. Not even an hour. And this attempt to intimidate Europe is obvious. Well, by the way, and when do you launch fighters towards Tallinn? It's not a joke. If a fighter jet that can release a dagger is flying in Estonia, what should people who live in Estonia think? They won't have time to think about anything. Estonia is so small, forgive me. I once saw a shoot that was made by Estonian documentary filmmakers, specifically to show how serious the problems of defense of this small Baltic country are. Well, by the way, I want to read it to you. The cameras on it flew Estonia from end to end at super high speed, in my opinion, they're in 1.5 or 2 minutes. From the Baltic Sea to the border with Latvia. I want to read you a quote from the Estonian edition of Eesti Express. What we are now anxiously observing, in the second half of the last century, was commonplace. It was important not to cross certain boundaries. It was possible to exchange barbs, but to bring the matter to a big war. The armed forces of dictatorships can behave like crazy, because society in such countries allows them to. In democratic states, Any games of war are strongly rejected, and Estonia is no exception. We are obliged to remain calm, write the journalist-writer Andrei Kvostev. Well, that is, calm down, do not answer them. Maybe they'll have a little fun and calm down. However, this is very similar to the mood in Ukrainian society, somewhere in the 2020, in the 21st. Such is the confidence that they, of course, can afford this hooliganism. And our main task is not to react, in any case not to react. Do you remember how they attacked former President Petro Poroshenko when our ships, in full compliance with international agreements and with Russia, tried to cross the Kerch Strait and were detained? And they didn't violate anything. They followed a course that was stipulated by existing international agreements and should not have been detained in any way. But everyone blamed the Ukrainian leadership for sending sailors there, knowing that Russia could detain them there. Well, there was only one, I would say, murky episode, when the issue of introducing a state of emergency was further discussed. And a 2-month deadline suddenly arose. And you remember that a political scandal has already broken out because of this. Because if martial law had been extended for 2 months, then the entire electoral structure would, to put it mildly, have been askew. And as a result, then the bank passed back, and martial law was only for 1 month. Yes, and in my opinion, it is in part of the country's region. I think that the essence of the reaction then outraged was because of this, that someone may have tried to use this incident for the purposes of either disrupting or postponing the elections. And someone, on the contrary, wanted to prove that this incident is being used in terms of disrupting or postponing the elections. Well, listen, this is politics, this is. But that's not the point. I'm just saying that the Europeans are now reacting very, very cautiously to this. Well, I saw yesterday how the Latvian defense minister said that she had talked with her Danish colleagues, as well as other defense ministers. And Denmark said that they believe that a state entity was involved in the drone attack on Denmark, as she put it. Well, it's clear what kind of subject. Such a subject. And in Copenhagen, they immediately denied it. They said, "We don't know where this information is taken from in Riga, but how from where? She just came from negotiations with you. You said it yourself." And at the same time, I read yesterday the statement of the Danish defense minister, who said that it is obvious to us that the incident over Copenhagen airport, the appearance of these unidentified drones, is a hybrid military operation. Yes, but they don't blame Russia directly. They say that Russia may be interested in this, but they do not say that it is she. But in any case, it seems to me that most often Russia will use all sorts of hybrid methods in order to always look for. And this is not us, we are not there, but they are the little hands. Well, listen, look, you can generally say that we don't have there in any case. Fighters, it was clearly them, they were all seen, photographed. These were real Russian fighters. Does Russia deny the facts of their presence in the military airspace of Estonia? No, they flew, but they didn't fly approximately. Not knocked up, yes. Well, that also says a lot. Therefore, I think that, after all, Russia now wants to use the technological turn of the war with Ukraine. Now they have already made sure that drones can quite successfully nightmare everyone around. And it's inexpensive. Today, we also had a conversation with my Ukrainian colleague. She says, well, where does Russia have the money to, in addition to the war in Ukraine, also arrange such hybrid wars in Europe? And drones are inexpensive. A drone is inexpensive, yes. This is not Iskander missiles or a Dagger, or even these old Ha-101 ones. Therefore, you can just launch these drones, they are cheap, to Europe, block the airspace there, cause damage worth billions of dollars. Because, well, so far we have seen the closure of Yeshua, which is already very bad for supporting Ukraine, if it is often closed. Lublin, Warsaw and Modlin, Copenhagen and Aalborg. But we haven't seen the most important thing yet. If you close Frankfurt, Munich, Paris, and, for example, Gatwick with Heathrow, it will cost you billions by tens of billions of dollars economically. Well, I came across an article in Defense Express. This is a Ukrainian publication. Despite the fact that it is called in the English manner, but they analyzed, in my opinion, quite convincingly the drone capabilities of the Russian Federation, claim that already today Russian drones are able to fly to Spain. I tend to think that they don't need to fly anywhere at all. I think that those drones that we saw in the airspace of the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Norway, Sweden in general, launched from the territory of the Scandinavian countries. Of course, I think that drones, which the Ukrainian Defense Forces and Ukrainian Special Services sometimes use against certain objects of the Russian Federation, are not necessarily launched from the territory of Ukraine. It is quite likely that these are special operations, and this drone is being assembled somewhere out there in some huge sea of garages. In some, imagine these garage ones. Yes, Russia is a garage country, where, easily in the wilds of these garage anthills, specially trained, embedded and specially trained people of the Esbugurum calmly assemble these drones there and then send them where they should. Well, I think the famous operation of the web was a revelation in this sense. Well, yes, if you remember, we even talked after it about what I say. That now this is an absolutely outstanding military discovery of the Ukrainian Special Services. The special services of any other country can use, and that now no state can feel safe. Because no ocean will save America from launching drones from its own territory. We once considered it an absolutely extraordinary discovery that you can take an airplane, use it as a live bomb, as it was on September 11th. And the drone is a completely different discovery. No plane is needed anymore. You can simply launch a certain number of drones at some strategic American military facility, blow up something there. And this will already generate a whole wave of, so to speak, political and military consequences. And I have a feeling, as Western politicians and the military say, that the West itself is not ready for this drone war. The only two armies that have really accumulated a lot of experience are the Russian and the Ukrainian. Therefore, and ironically, now Ukrainian servicemen will train their Polish colleagues and handle drones. And I think that this should continue to spread, that it is necessary to teach not only Poles. Recently, so to speak, the armies of NATO countries treated the Ukrainian military condescendingly, who had to be taught there to handle the latest military equipment, to teach on the F-35, to fly on the F-16. Of course, this is all important when you are dealing with daggers and Iskanders, but when you are dealing with drones, no 35 and 16 will protect you from such attacks. And here a completely different type of experience gained by the Ukrainian military is needed. Well, it is clear that, again, all this technology will change and improve rapidly in the coming months. And it is quite possible that already in the 26th year, we will see a new type of war. Because the most, I would say, rapid military technical, otherwise I am the most rapid technical progress. It cannot even be compared with the military in terms of the strength of technical progress during the war, when both sides are interested in innovation, success, victory over opponents. Therefore, the best minds work to destroy the enemy. Therefore, there may be many more. And again, it is clear that the other side will always use the findings in the opposite way. Therefore, now it is clear what Chinese officers are doing on the battlefields when they are watching Russian, and, by the way, North Korean soldiers. In general, I believe that Xi Jinping himself sent North Korean soldiers to this front so that they would become, so to speak, these tin soldiers that he can follow, because it is clear that he cannot crawl Chinese servicemen to this front. And in this situation, they also learn. But the Russians can teach the Chinese, they can teach the North Koreans, the Iranians. The Iranians can teach the Russians eventually. The first Shaheds, they came from Iran, so they are still called Shaheds there. Although it is clear that Russia itself already produces all these Don in the same Yelabuga. And only Ukrainians can teach Europeans and Americans, they have no other antidote. Dear friends, let me remind you live on my channel, and on Vitaly Portnikov's channel. We are talking on different interesting and important topics on two channels in parallel. I repeat, I'm waiting for likes from you, I'm waiting for comments, replicas, questions. There are some questions that I may be going to elaborate on a little more. And I also want to say that here we are with Vitaly Eduardovich when we have talked enough and say goodbye. This video will be posted on the record. There, by the way, you can watch the whole first, if someone did not immediately join our audience. And in the description of the video, there will be links to the website and to the bot in the Telegram. If you follow these links, you will be able to find out how to purchase and install my VPN for a small amount of absolutely symbolic money, if desired. This, of course, mainly concerns viewers who watch in the Russian Federation. VPN. For me, my friends and colleagues with whom I cooperate in this project have created specifically so that I can offer you an effective, very effective tool to overcome the blocking, slowing down of YouTube, and other nasty things that Roskomnadzor and all sorts of other state power organizations in Russia are trying to create. But in the end, with the help of this VPN, you can simply continue to call your friends, relatives, acquaintances in the usual way through WhatsApp or Telegram, which the authorities are now trying to prohibit. Having said that, I continue my conversation with Vitaly Portnikov, and I want to ask you something. You mentioned Zelensky in advance, his meeting with Trump, after which Trump made this almost official text on his social network. Do you think Zelensky influenced Trump's attitude towards Ukraine and this war with his recent meetings and conversations? Well, because we all remember how they quarreled at the very end of February. There have been several meetings since then. And personally, I have a feeling that from meeting to meeting, Trump is softening towards Zelensky. Thawing. Yes, I think I did. It is quite possible that Zelensky understood exactly what the tactics of behavior with Trump should be. Perhaps Western leaders helped him in this, who are also trying to find a common language with the American president there. Something else is also possible. Trump made sure that what Zelensky told him about Putin turned out to be true. He could have told him that Putin would throw you, that he was not going to negotiate with you at all. That we want to negotiate with you, and Putin is deceiving you. And after Putin let Trump down, he began to treat Zelensky more favorably, who, firstly, did not let him down, and never refused any peace talks, and there is no such process to settle, and secondly, was he right in Putin's assessment? This may also be the case. Again, but this is for now, because we don't know what will happen in a week. But Trump's attitude towards Zelensky has really improved markedly, it's true. Yeah. Well, obviously, contacts of Zelensky's people, Yermak, Sibiga and others with Trump's people, also played some role in this. Apparently. I can't say about that anymore. I do not know how much Trump listens to anyone at all. Because it's wonderful. Who clearly has a good relationship. Definitely listening. You heard Trump say to Erdogan, "I don't like people who have their own opinions, but for some reason I like you." Therefore, I believe that all these people of they, communicating with Trump, say what Trump wants to hear. In a softer version, in a less soft version. The same Kala repeatedly, so to speak, remaining a supporter of Ukraine, said a lot of things that contradicted common sense. From the point of view of the Russian-Ukrainian position. Well, nothing. Because these are the things Trump said. There is another great example of another person who is clearly a supporter of Ukraine. This is Lindsey Graham. Oh yeah? Who generally called on Zelensky to resign or send another person to negotiate if he can't talk to Trump. Although I said it clearly, Graham, as a senator with many years of experience, has a clear, I would say, not just a political, but a value position that always protects. But I have always believed, excuse me for interrupting, that Mark Rubio also has a rigid value position, which in a sense he inherited from McCain, with whom he was very close once. And in the end, family stories. Well, of course, a person born into a family of Cuban immigrants, well, it's true in the United States. He can't love either Cuba, the Soviet Union, or the Putin regime that inherited him. I think Mark Rubio has much higher stakes than Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham needs to finish his senatorial career with dignity. And Mark Rubio needs to become President of the United States. I think this is the main goal of his political life. And I think he doesn't hide it much, even if Trump calls him among the possible candidates for this position from the Republican Party. And 4. Well, we remember that in the 16th year, Marco Rubio was one of the favorites at the very beginning of the race, and many called him a possible winner. Him and Ted Cruz, another senator of Cuban descent, by the way. And then Trump appeared. But Trump appeared, and everything went to pieces for these guys. But this Trump will disappear. The question is, will Trump leave, leaving some regular J. Devens as his heir, or will he still say that Mark Ruby is a good guy and can be your president? After all, it is clear that it is impossible to become a Republican contender without Trump's blessing. For today, at least. Therefore, a position, a life goal, a life goal. Imagine what passions will unfold in the last year of Trump's tenure. What Shakespearean, I would say, trusts. I can't imagine. They will all sit very quietly under the bench because they will be afraid to reveal their ambitions. So that Trump does not decide that they want to sit him down. All these passions will begin literally in the last weeks of your stay before some final decision is already there. And in the last year, each of them says, no, 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 I don't want to be president. What are you what? In general, we must do everything to make our dear Donald president again. I'm afraid it won't work. You forget that there is such a thing as primaries. The primaries begin already, if my memory serves me correctly, at the end of January or at the beginning of February. And after a few weeks, it becomes clear which of the representatives of one or another party inside themselves, inside the Republicans, inside the Democrats, has the greatest chances in this. And if Trump actually wants to become someone's vice president, oh, you know, Vitaly, this is a complex matter. I've been talking to my friends, American political scientists, who are much better versed in these legal matters there. It seems that somewhere in one of the amendments to the Constitution, there are some words that can be interpreted in such a way that the President of the United States who has served 2 terms cannot become Vice President either. Yes, but knowing how all this is happening in America today, I do not rule out that there may be some kind of lawsuit about this. A civil one, of course, and that the case may reach the Supreme Court, but how the Supreme Court votes there, where the majority of judges are on Trump's side, this is a big question. Vitaly, while we still have time, there are a few questions that I would certainly like to ask you today. First of all, this Sunday there are parliamentary elections in Moldova. And it would seem, where is Moldova? And where are all the big grandiose political events and figures that we are discussing with you? But in fact the choice is significant, in some sense fateful. Pro-Russian forces can return there. Yes, the authorities can, and this is a very serious problem. She is serious on several points. The first point is that Russia is trying to surround Ukraine with a ring of unfriendly regimes. Here is Hungary, Slovakia, an attempt in Romania, because it was a completely clear attempt. Here, which failed only because we can say that Bucharest went all in there after the first round of these elections and cancelled them. And so the president of Romania, of course, would be Colin George. The second point is that Ukraine is in an integration trap that it has placed itself in. Ukraine is paired with Moldova on the issue of joining the European Union. At the same time, Hungary blocks the start of negotiations with Ukraine, and thus negotiations with Moldova are not held either. There was an idea in the European Union to separate these 2 countries and start negotiations with Moldova, even before the parliamentary elections in this country, in order to give the pro-European forces a trump card for success in the elections. In Kiev, this was strongly resisted. This was publicly stated by President Vladimir Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials. In the end, the European Commission agreed with this logic, not only Ukrainian. But now it will work in the opposite direction, if pro-Russian forces win in Moldova and if they make any decisions that, in principle, will stop Moldova's European integration, since Georgia's European integration was stopped. Most likely Ukraine's European integration can be safely put an end to for many years. Without any Hungary, without any vetoes. There will just be a couple doomed to a long sitting in the waiting room. So, by the way, for many years, almost 10 years, Albania was sitting in the waiting room, which did not conduct the negotiation process by the European Union, only because at the beginning Greece and then Bulgaria blocked the negotiation process not with Albania, but with Northern Macedonia. And there were no complaints about Albania at all, not one, no one. It's just that no negotiations were held with her. Until the moment when the European Commission, after waiting, in my opinion, for 12 years, finally decided that it would negotiate with Albania. So these elections, in principle, can complete the process of European integration of Ukraine, at least in the period up to there. Not complete, but for a long time. Suspend, at least until the next parliamentary elections, in Moldova presidential. Here is such an antidote invented in Moscow to put an end to everything, and in this whole process, or a comma there, right. Even then, when Ukraine was against the separation from Moldova, I said that, well, you will separate. Well, yes, Moldova will not depend on you, but you will not depend on Moldova. And I was told no, then Ukraine will move into the category of countries that will be candidates and not candidates, whose accession to the European Union no one will remember seriously. And President Zelensky and the current Ukrainian government cannot afford it, because they have to make European integration part of the program, so to speak, Ukraine's struggle for liberation from aggression. Well, you didn't want to disconnect then, don't disconnect now. And this, by the way, may suit many of the same Hungary, which will protest against the separation of Ukraine. And Moldova will be able to block its European integration legally, without any claim to Ukraine. That's what this election is about. These elections are a tool for finding Ukraine and Moldova in a gray zone for many years, as Putin wants. And as Orban wants, by the way. Listen, do you admit that in the end, the Moldovan authorities will have to take measures similar to those taken by the Romanian authorities? Yes, I admit it, if only they have the opportunity, because you understand that in fact Moldova has a less strong state than Romania. Romania has a strong enough state, no matter what. And there is a moment of consolidation of the political elite in such difficult situations. It's just the legacy of the state they've always had. They have always had a strong state. And even in communist times, as you remember. And at some point, if you like, before the execution, they are able to unite. Even when it comes to irreconcilable political opponents. Because we must remember that all these people who united in order to stop this march, Elena Georgescu, President Iohannis, representatives of government parties there, they really just couldn't stand each other. But nevertheless, they managed to unite. It was worth a lot of losses. As you remember, President Klaus Hannes even had to resign from the presidency ahead of schedule, without waiting for the next election. Because in fact, his political career was trampled on at the finish of his tenure as head of state. But they did it. And as far as it is possible for Moldova, I will not tell you. So we will see if there is such a situation. Well, it's not long to wait. I repeat the elections this Sunday, but you admit that we will already understand what happened on Sunday evening or by Monday morning. You admit that, for example, if the pro-Russian forces win, an attempt will be made to turn Transnistria, where there are so-called Russian peacekeepers, albeit in very small numbers, where there are abundant weapons depots, into a springboard for aggression against Ukraine with the West. And I don't really understand how, because how will new servicemen be delivered to this region? There is an extremely small contingent there. Under the guise of how they came at the time, I saw it with my own eyes. You know, here. Through what territory, Zhen? Geographically, how will this happen? And what? They used to come through Ukraine, but now how will they arrive? Wait, are there flights from Belarus to Moldova? Which ones? Aviation. Yes. I'm not sure through which airspace. All right. Are there any flights from Turkey for sure? From Turkey, of course, yes. Here. And from Moscow. Will these people be let in just like that? Well, that's also a good question. Listen, I perfectly remember such an episode that happened to me. Somewhere, probably it was in. The Maiden was already in full swing. Probably, the shooting has already begun on Institutskaya. I was just returning from the last trip to Moscow in my life. I was returning to Kiev, yes. It was just on the first or second day of the shooting at Institutskaya I was flying. Then planes were still flying from Moscow to Kiev. And there were tourists with me who surprisingly resembled regular military personnel dressed in civilian clothes. There were 2 of them or 3 dozen people. Yes, I understand what you're talking about. It's like that all the time. And then they went, maybe to the Crimea, maybe to the east, or maybe. I only think about routes. I don't really understand how this is going to happen now. How tourists will travel in small groups through Turkey to Chisinau, and from Chisinau to Transnistria, right? In Transnistria. Yes, but it is necessary for the Moldovan authorities to be ready to let them all in, yes, to accept them. The pro-Russian government can do this. There is logic in this. Well, but it's a long one. Well, you know, but so far they have been accepted. It will take a year or 2 before they kick everyone in these small groups. It's a long process. Everything hasn't been updated there for a long time, not to mention that these tourists won't bring weapons with them. Everything is very old weapons there. It is necessary to talk to military experts, ask what kind of weapons there are. But they say that even 3-line rifles work perfectly to this day. And the Ukrainian ones, you have heard that these mobile groups are Ukrainian, which are fighting with Russian drones, Do you know what kind of weapons are often used? For me, it was just a shock when a military expert told me about it. Machine guns, Maxim. It's beautiful, yes, it's like in the movies. Maxim machine guns which for these cues from time to time. Movies. So, here are Maxim machine guns, which, it turns out, have lain neatly in a warehouse since the Civil War, neatly packed in some warehouses. All in oil and still work perfectly. Yes, but in fact, it was a very effective rapid-fire weapon with a large caliber. There's only one thing that overheated it great. This is the casing that everyone remembers. Yes, in my opinion, 2 buckets of water had to be periodically filled in there. And then this water boiled up. Well, that's a very good point. Again, it's not going to be that easy. But there are other problems besides that. Some kind of assistance to Ukraine through Moldova may be blocked there. The territories of Moldova can be used for the work of Russian special services. Maybe a lot of things are happening. Do you know what else can happen? Russia can push through the idea of unification of Moldova and Transnistria. Remember, Kozak once hatched this plan, and repeated it, tried to repeat it already under Dodon, to show that loyalty. Loyalty promises territorial integrity. They can unite Moldova and Transnistria into one anti-Ukrainian and anti-European entity. This may also be their idea. And then everything will be easier in general. You will recall Kozak's plan that the Russian army should have been on the territory of Moldova for 20 or 30 years. In the event of unification. Here's a perfect example for you. What can they aspire to? They don't forget anything. Yeah. It's like that. And probably the last topic that I can't pass by is the story of the recognition of the non-existent state of Palestine. Yes, here's an amazing thing. Yes, no one in the world wants to recognize the fully established advanced developed state of Taiwan. Well, at the same time. Well, Taiwan. The state is there. Mass recognition of the state of Palestine, which does not exist. You see, I think that the recognition of the state of Palestine in any case looks like a pure political utopia. Because everyone says that Palestine should be without Hamas. And no one knows how to make Palestine without Hamas. The war must be stopped, and Palestine must be without Hamas. But the problem is that Hamas enjoys the support of the Palestinian street precisely because it promises the destruction of Israel. Previously, the strongest political party in the Palestinian territories was Fatah, whose popularity ended exactly when Fatah agreed with the existence of Israel. Therefore, when they say, here Mahmoud Abbas spoke at the session of the UN General Assembly and declared recognition of Israel's right to exist, this is absolutely wonderful. Israel has a partner in peace. So, you will hold elections later in this Palestinian Authority. And this whole party of Mahmoud Abbas will be covered with a copper basin. I can't hear you. Your microphone is turned off. Touch the button. I say, at least conduct a public opinion poll in these very Palestinian territories. Well, that's what I'm talking about. How did you react to Abbas' speech in support of Israel? Yes. Therefore, a clear question. If you want a Palestinian state, then the main goal of this Palestinian state will be the destruction of Israel. If you want a Palestinian state that does not want to destroy Israel, then the residents of the Palestinian territories themselves do not need such a state. Period. Yes, it is clear that recent years have led to a serious increase in right-wing radical sentiments in Israel. But we understand why. These are the very Israelis who, at one time, for the most part, supported the Oslo Agreement and believed in the possibility of the existence of two states. Why didn't this happen? Because the Palestinian street has clearly said that it does not need two states. She needs one state in which there would not be a single Jew. Therefore, all these confessions are utopia. And, by the way, many people noticed how wonderful the president of Indonesia spoke, saying that Israel needs to ensure the right to exist, and that Indonesia recognizes Israel as soon as Israel recognizes Palestine. Yeah. Well, Israel does not recognize Palestine, because Palestine does not recognize Israel. That's the whole, so to speak, enchanted circle of Middle Eastern wars, which still have to go on and on. Yeah. Well, friends, we need to finish slowly. I want to react only to one remark that has been personally released to me. You know, I always say, and even have already stopped warning. When they are being insulted, when they are engaged in flooding, or when I see that this is not a spectator, but this is some kind of Kremlin troll, I immediately send without any conversations, without any in the ban. But here a person makes a correct remark to me. Dima Vint writes, Mr. Kisilyev, do not idealize this Andropov. Well, you know, I'm not trying to idealize this Andropov. I once made a big documentary two-part film about him. And I'm just judging this person. According to him, I couldn't interview him. And at that time, and it was the end of the 90s, there was not much literature, it appeared later. Let's say in the noughties, in the 10th years. But I was lucky. Almost all the people who worked with him as assistants, advisors, and speechwriters were still alive at that time. So with their help, I drew such a verbal portrait of a man who was, well, let's say, not a black-and-white figure. Let's still not forget that Andropov was probably the most educated of all the members of the Politburo. Although I did not have a formal higher education, but was, according to all the people who worked with him, a terrible book whose a serious bookseller was interested in both scientific humanitarian literature and fiction, and asked his assistants for advice, and welcomed every kind of discussion in this narrow circle, and yet it was not by chance that he chose Andropov. Excuse me, please, it was not by chance that Andropov chose Gorbachev and helped him climb to the very top. I'm not idealizing, but thanks to the deceased, even though he has sins above the roof on him. For 15 years, a man was at the head of the KGB, but nevertheless, in a sense, thanks to him. At one time in the Soviet Union, we received a new leader, Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, the late, who did a lot to ensure that at least an attempt would be made at democratic reforms, including Ukraine gaining independence in the course of this process. I don't know what you're going to say, Vitaly, but I've said what I think. I think that political figures, especially in authoritarian states, should generally be judged precisely as political figures. I also don't have any, I would say, idealistic attitude towards any members of the Politburo of the CPSU Central Committee. But we are discussing the political process. The political process in a planetary state where there are different people. Someone is striving for change, someone is striving for canning, someone is a criminal, someone is an executioner. Someone is an expert in economics or there is a specialist in the military-industrial complex. Therefore, these are all people who are personalities. Again, since I had different conversations with a number of members of the Politburo of the CPSU Central Committee there, and including this is not a real Politburo, which was already after the 90s, and those people who were still in previous Politburo compositions, it is clear that these were very different people with different personal qualities. I have always taken into account that they were in the regime of a one-party state and such a one-party dictatorship, but in themselves, they were figures with political ambitions, views, and they were different people. That's the point. There would not have been different people, there would not have been that Soviet Union, which eventually came to its end and gave birth to some group of people who aspired to change. Yes, and then there is no need to mix personal human qualities. For example, I once had the pleasure of communicating with Egor Kuzmich Ligachev. Yes, I have also repeatedly. In his personal life, he was the sweetest intellectual. A very nice man. And as a politician, he was a terrible person who was an ascetic in some sense, did not drink, did not smoke, but I took the subway. And at his house, except 4 bookcases, in my opinion, there was nothing else in his apartment. I remember coming into the apartment, stunned, all the walls in the bookcases, even in the hallway. At the same time, as a politician, he was a conservative, a retrograde and a shareholder. Yes, so I'm not arguing at all. My friends, it's time for us to finish. My next stream will start soon, literally in a couple of minutes. So that means I thank everyone. I remind you to react first of all with subscriptions. And once again, pay attention to the links that you can follow. Install my special VPN developed for you, very effective means of combating various kinds of attempts to block access to the internet and to various services you need. That's it for me. Vitaly, thank you very much. Until the next meeting. Good luck.